Hi, I'm Doug. I wrote The Guardsman under the pen name R.G. Taark. We are on to book number 3. That should be this one right here. We are on episode number 44. This is chapters 105 through 109. Please sit back, relax, and enjoy. When you get a chance, please hit that like, subscribe, and comment button. We'd love to hear from you. So again, please enjoy.
The Guardsman, Book 3, Wrath and Retribution, Episode 44, Chapters 105 through 109. Chapter 105. Warsong dropped into the outskirts of the fleet rally point and slowly made her way to the center of the fleet in deep space. They had taken months to collect all those ships in the deep dark void between solar systems this far out from hegemony space. They all took long circuitous routes all the way around hegemony space, behind the Celestas League, and were now parked in a deep space holding area in dead space between stars. They were so deep comets didn't even traverse the span. They had the whole width of the League between themselves and home. Many of the ships had been stationary for several months, waiting for the rest of the fleet to arrive, on top of their months of clandestine travel time. Samson was obliged to meet with the fleet admiral. Since they both held equivalent rank, he wanted to make sure that the other understood Samson viewed the admiral as the subject matter expert. Samson made it perfectly clear that he wanted to stay out of his way while he maneuvered and directed the fleet. The admiral, whom he had never met before, was politely pleased, but kept that to himself as far as Samson could tell. Samson's host went on to explain that they were going to transit through wide gaps in between solar systems and then finish around underneath and behind their target system. That maneuver would increase their transit time from just over 3 weeks straight line to the target to nearly 2 months and a week. They were going to drop into the star's gravity well on the opposite side from the planet of Torfona. They would use the star's mass to disrupt their drives and then help to accelerate the fleet around the star. They would clear their ships from each other's paths by staggering entry and accelerating the slowest ships entering first so faster ones could catch up on the other side. They would still arrive within moments of the critical target window. Samson liked the idea of maneuvering during that time instead of sitting stationary and waiting for the time to attack. The ground soldier in him knew that sitting stationary and bored was a good way to be found by the enemy and lose momentum on the attack. The explanation was a little obtuse and didn't really make as much sense as he would have liked. On top of that, it didn't really match what he'd learned in the basic navigation classes he'd taken in the academy. He finished listening, a little confused by that explanation, and asked, "Won't the larger mass of the capital ships cause them to break out of their jumps farther out from the star than smaller ships?" His host shrugged easily. "Well, yes." Without missing a beat, he continued, "But we will automatically have our navigators program the staggered entry to avoid collisions and coordinate proper entry." I was oversimplifying the navigational nuances. That could have been the case, and the admiral was just trying to speak to his audience. Unfortunately, Samson didn't really believe the admiral while he listened. He may have been out of his depth, but the latter half of the explanation reeked of being caught making excuses. Instead of saying so, Samson just quirked his brow up and joked, "I hope not. I sure as hell don't want to fly all these light years only to crash into a star and become a little puff of atomic particles." Chapter 106. The clanking and jostling before being suspended in total black was the same as every single one of his training jumps. Jonas calmly waited. He spent his brief time reviewing the map of the world waiting below him. He had not been told to, but with a completely new team around him of more or less strangers, he did everything he could to be absolutely perfect. The general attitude that he encountered was that they were as pissed off that the idiot Milcom HQ had sent them a dumbass private instead of a real replacement as they were at his being there. He knew his first posting would be rough, but this was terrifying. He did everything he could to learn and prove he belonged there, and if that meant memorizing the map so he could draw it for his team sergeant, that was exactly what he did. On top of his own determination, they had ruthlessly drilled him on every weapon they could possibly be carrying or expect to claim from the enemy once on the ground. On the first day he was there, still above their home world, they unceremoniously stuck him in Alpha Team with lots of grumbles. To make things worse, while he still didn't even know anyone's names that first day, they had taken away every weapon he was familiar with and broken out a museum piece relic for him. The thing actually used chemicals exploding to send a giant metal bullet flying. The weapon was light and compact, but the ammunition was absurdly heavy and bulky. They'd pounded on him day and night with random training exercises from clearing and cleaning to combat reloading to one-hand reloads and ambidextrous shooting. No sooner had he finished with one squad member, and he'd be handed off to another to help clean gear or check pods or inspect parachutes or do physical training. It was like they had a whole new training schedule worked out just for him, as he was firmly kicked from task to task without break or ceremony. He didn't even know how many days he had been on the ship anymore. The silent, comforting black of his pod was a quiet and welcoming cocoon after so many days of hating his own life. He stroked the locked, but not loaded, assault rifle that he was told to make into his new best friend. The silenced and flash-suppressed weapon would not fire inside his pod without a round in the chamber. That was comforting, since blowing a hole in his own space-bound pod would have been a bad start and end to his military career. Just like all the other times he dropped, Jonas heard a few launches and then lurched himself, and suddenly his tiny window was filled with a new star field. He drifted and drifted forever, and then almost as a surprise he started to see the rippling and buffeting atmosphere around his squared stealth drop pod. He forced himself to relax, just like all the other times he dropped in simulators and the Arctic exercise and then in the advanced training phase. And then it was over. His chutes deployed perfectly, and his pod came to a lurching halt as its trajectory stabilizing programming became mute and the fickle wind and gravity took over for the last few seconds of the drop. He saw a blue sky, which flashed to green woods, and finally a green and harvest yellow field. He felt his drop pod nose down into the dirt, and as designed fell back so he was reclining on his rear. He kicked and punched the two release buttons so he could escape the pod, and it cracked open like an overripe green bean. Jonas pushed his way out of his pod and looked around the waving wheat field. He was stunned to see every single one of the 8 other members of his squad doing exactly the same thing as he was, crisply deploying from their pods and scanning the area for threats. It was surreal to be doing this on an alien world with a real team before going into harm's way. He reached into his pod when given the all-clear hand signal from his team sergeant and ripped his pack out of the harness that had supported his back. Jonas shouldered the load and silently strapped it tight. He still could not believe they'd all landed within 150 meters of each other, all 9 of their pods. And after that drop in the Arctic tundra, he thought he would need to navigate around by himself for a week just looking for everyone. The rest of his jumps had been launched one at a time in staggered intervals to ensure safety on the drop zone. They spent the next 90 minutes in 4-man teams, sprinting back and forth out into the field, recovering the drop pods and hauling them out of the mangled wheat field. Once in the woods, they could camouflage and hide the pods for later retrieval. One of his Bravo team counterparts, a farm boy from some outlying planet, informed their squad leader while Jonas was hauling a pod past them that they probably had about 30 days before the wheat in that field was ready for harvest. He'd said basically that no one would spend much time looking at the wheat in this remote part of the field until then. He seemed to think that they would just check the samples at the opposite end of the field that butted against the distant road. When they secured and hid the last of their pods, his squad leader fired a silent armed signal to Jonah's team sergeant telling him to take the lead. Jonas followed. They had over 150 kilometers to cover on foot in the next few days over rough terrain, all the while avoiding civil patrols and civilians while they were looking for some military base. Chapter 107. Persephone's people had finally tracked the secure coin courier corporations and roundabout delivery methods to the agency responsible for placing the short buys for Casimir. That drew a direct line between the syndicate criminal enterprise and the two brokers sitting before her now. The Rutger brothers were treated with respect due to their power and influence and were seated comfortably at one of her conference room tables on the outskirts of her secure agency's perimeter. They even had beverages and other amenities found in board rooms all over their city available on a small side table. She started without preamble. We've traced the criminal funds to your brokerage agency in coin. That is a fantastic amount of coin-based credits that pass through your hands into the markets as options and then back out as fraudulently gained shares in my holding company. She paused and set her hook, or in a smaller but still fantastically large coin draw the morning of the riots a few months back. What can you tell me about your client? The brothers looked at one another. Lennox scoffed. You have nothing. You are just witch-hunting because that miserable, unfaithful, lying wretch Diantha has been whispering nonsense in your empty ears. You'll be hearing from our legal representation when we press suit for slander. If your pig-headed actions cost us a single client, we will press for lost fees and damages. Persephone heard an irritated sigh from behind her and turned her head just enough to see Major McKinley crossing his tree-trunk thick arms across his chest while leaving his assault grouse hanging from his sling. Bryce lounged with his right shoulder on the door-frame, but with his finger lovingly stroking the trigger assembly of his own weapon. She could tell neither was pleased with how this had all kicked off. She trusted their instincts. She countered coolly, "Stow your bullshit, Lennox." Persephone heard her voice harder than she ever imagined. She rolled forward. We have detailed records of the syndicate banking transactions and the clearly criminal activity that funded those accounts. We have vid of the syndicate bosses and their couriers transporting those funds in coin to third-party courier services. Those courier services keep package tracking records based on weight and destination for billing purposes. Those same packages were then handed off 3 and 4 times, but always the same unopened package that was shipped initially arrived at your brokerage. That makes you complicit in an ongoing criminal conspiracy as their bankers and money launderers. So why don't you two do us both a favor and describe your client and his instructions to you both? As an by the way, I can give you the exact date and time window where you two fell off all surveillance for a period of 2.5 hours. Morning hours, by the way, hours that just so happened to coincide with the first day your firm started receiving large deliveries of syndicate coin. Lennox ground his teeth together and scratched his head in his telltale nervous tic. Stewart began politely. Our client was a high-paying fellow who desired anonymity. Large investors have all manner of reasons to hide their identities when investing. There is no rule against it, only that funds be verified before purchases are made. In the case of bank-to-bank transactions that require identity and confirmation of funds. No such requirement is needed with coins because the coin is verified funds according to hegemony common law. Our client was a fellow named Christos who went so far as to wear a mask and gloves during all our meetings. He said he wanted to place shorts on your family's holding company. I told him that I'd checked the CGH price that morning as part of my normal portfolio work. I also told him as a matter of prudent financial advice that your company was unanimously listed on all the major buy lists. I informed him that the price was depressed because of the economic slowdown situation in the city, security and succession concerns, along with a security blockade. I informed him that he was betting against the asset values and financial indications. And then I told him that the share prices were literally so low that long investors could buy 100 credits worth of cash flow and assets for only 90 credits worth of investment. I then asked him, "Do you actually think their price will go down farther?" Persephone nodded, accepting the explanation given by Stuart without hesitation or apparent deception. Her interrogation teams monitoring the conversation remotely would be able to tell her later if it was a lie or not. Her gut was that it was the truth or part of it. Persephone continued, "So you offered sound financial advice given the information you had in hand." She paused, pretending to consider her scripted comments. "If that was the case, why did you both invest over 1,000,000 credits each in the same put options that this Christos fellow mentioned?" Lennox oozed his typical derision on Persephone as he snapped, "Why in the hell not? We had a client so confident in his information that he was willing to invest billions of credits. Why shouldn't we have taken a piece of Casimir's action, you dumb bitch?" Unnoticed by Lennox, Persephone cocked her head slightly to the side as she instantly caught the slip. Stuart looked to his right at his older brother and just stared. Persephone just nodded once and stood. Instead of being disturbed by the icy feeling in her chest, she was strengthened and reinforced by it. She spoke to her guardsmen and listening personnel, remand them to custody as knowingly complicit in an ongoing criminal conspiracy. She added, "In addition, we need to account for your mother and father, prepare for the pentacle murder for hire." Lennox shot to his feet shouting, while Stuart pressed his nose and eyes into his palms and squeezed his temples. "What the hell are you talking about, you dumb bitch? We never murdered anyone for hire. Those two fools crashed into another vehicle while commuting." Persephone looked over her shoulder to stay her guardsman's advance. They unobtrusively drifted to the opposite corners of the conference room. Her guardsmen had converging and crossing sectors of fire that kept her and themselves clear, looking comfortably across the expanse of the conference room table, while ready to shred both brothers into bloody messes. Looking back at the brothers, Persephone continued as if uninterrupted. "That killed both of your parents, their security head in the front seat and driver behind the wheel, plus the murdered driver of the truck you used to stage the accident. All 4 families, the truck driver, the family driver, the security head, and your biological sister, will be paid reparations for damages when, or I should say, should you be found guilty. But given the detailed mountain of evidence that I have on you, conviction is more or less a sure thing. Since you are both knowingly party to an insurrection that actually involves foreign agents, the rules for trial are a little different than a standard civilian libel suit. You know planetary charters grant certain rights to all sentient life. What most forget, and the reason you are in the counterintelligence section, is that one of the few exceptions is offensive insurrections involving mass terror activities. Terror activities like lighting a whole city on fire for profit in order to fund that foreign-backed insurrection. And yes, I do have those correspondences too. You will be my guest for a little while in less comfortable quarters. Will inform you of the additional charges, and believe me, there will be more charges levied as we rip apart your business dealings in more detail using Casimir's notes. In the meanwhile, your assets will be frozen, relegating them to legal defense escrow accounts, allowing only for withdrawals to Law Guild certified legal counsel. Should you lose, of course, as the accused party in a pentacle murder, you will additionally be billed for the court costs. but we've covered the likelihood of convictions already, haven't we? As she turned to walk out, she passed her advancing guardsman. She ignored Lennox's profanity and protests. She didn't bother to mention that Casimir had kept detailed audio and video records on his terminal of every single one of their nefarious transactions over the last 25 years before his fall, including their joint murder planning sessions, setup of the brothers' alibis, and murder of their parents. Plus, there were vids of their planning sessions to work with foreign backers to redirect funding for Casimir and Thanadio's insurrection long before the current incidents. Supremely arrogant and detail-oriented narcissists like Casimir just assumed that they would never get caught. In Casimir's mind, there was no need for him to not hold leverage over his victims and co-conspirators. To him, it was just a way to keep his underlings in line. He had kept detailed records for his own purposes, never considering that Persephone would actually seize his terminal, let alone crack his encryption. Just like the ancient cliched expression about women and the police. She had all the evidence in the world. She just wanted to hear these two bastards confess it out loud before she ruined them. Chapter 108. It was late afternoon before they arrived at the jump-off point for the insane adjustment to their orders. Jonas kept feeling his stomach flip-flop, and not as he thought about all the ways, in his limited experience, he could imagine that things would go wrong. Their whole squad crammed elbow to elbow and nut to butt in their tiny hide position, as their Bravo team sergeant complained in their hastily dug and camouflaged position up the hillside above the coastal village below. The only good thing about the position was that it overlooked the open bay that climbed to a rocky cliff at the south end. Whoever the over-ranked moron in orbit was who thought that their little squad of 9 could receive orders adjusting their mission, foot march last night's 50 kilometers in the dark, and then stage and prep today to sneak into the castle of all things were out of their bloody mind. The fleet was still many hours away from arrival. Their new mission had a timer on it, so they knew roughly when fleet would enter the system. They didn't need to know exactly from where they'd be arriving, only that they had limited time to prepare and reach their objectives. The disturbing part was that since orders were sent on timed intervals on tight beam transmissions, and they had already been heading in that direction, the whole thing reeked to Jonas as something that had already been planned, and either a primary team did not make it, or whoever had sent the orders wanted to wait to the last second to make sure they were not captured with knowledge of this objective. The light but cold soaking misty rain that had pelted them all night, through the morning and through today, was not inspiring any of them with high spirits either. They were wallowing in sticky mud, and warmth-leaching water was pooling at the bottom of their position. The hide position that their squad leader had picked after the prior night's exhausting run with full gear in the dark was more or less eye level with the top escarpment of the cliff on the opposite side of the bay. They were looking straight out across the open water between them and were looking at the first layer of the castle wall's base stones. The genius ordering their collective suicide had done them the courtesy of downloading detailed floor plans of the place, but neglected to mention how they were supposed to get into the fortress in the first place. They had to get past what had to be at least a battalion of elite League Guard troops, plus climb the walls or use the gate. All the while bypassing ranged sensors they didn't have the gear to see or defeat before they arrived. After that, they had to negotiate past whatever invisible sensors the place had cleverly disguised within its medieval facade. The place might look like something from 5,000 years before, but there was no way that an executive residence wasn't packed with security. He always figured in class that they stopped using things like that place because they were obsolete and ineffective, like their utility had just fallen away. Now, staring at the real thing, he knew how mistaken he was. They were huge, imposing, and effective, but modern weapons changed the tactics beyond the obvious expense of the place. That was the bone of contention that their squad leader and two team sergeants were arguing about now. Hearing his sergeants argue was unsettling to Jonas. He figured that as a private he did not know anything. Even ignoring bravado and the crap that the rest of the squad kept shoveling on him about him not knowing anything, it was not too much of a leap to realize just how little he did know. To hear the guys his life depended upon for guidance and instruction arguing because they did not know anything left him with a sinking and directionless feeling. He just stared through the spotting scope next to the Bravo team medic, who was now behind their covering silenced sniper rifle. From behind his spotting scope, Jonas scanned from the quiet resort town. About half of the buildings were displaying closed for the season signs as he scanned the town. He looked up and back to the nightmarish fortress, perched above the imposing solid rock cliffs. The resort village's buildings were to their bottom right pulled deep into the reverse C-shaped bay. The rise of the cliff in the distance climbed steadily from right to left up to the fortress. The cliff itself dropped down into the bay and tapered slowly down and around, encompassing the town and docks at just above water level with their own rolling hills behind the buildings, and then back up to the hill that cradled the village. Jonas eyed on the white rooster's tail of water spitting out of a large culvert grate and falling almost 50 meters into the sea. Jonas suggested into the argument, "Sergeant, what about using the storm drain at the edge of the cliff?" One of his teammates from deeper in their cave position, but still lying across Jonas' legs, objected, "I don't want to go into the shit system." He was stacked in the tiny hole with the rest of their team busy hollowing and chipping deeper into the dirt with their entrenching tools. They were using the dirt to build a gentle revetment to their front and tree branches to make a roof. They camouflaged the whole thing with parts of the trees and plants from the area. He kneed Jonas in the boot and then unnecessarily added, "Fucking dumbass, private." Pissed off that he would be called out and embarrassed like that in front of the rest of their squad, he pointed at the storm grate emptying into the sea. As the sniper searched with his own sights through the rain for what Jonas was pointing towards, Jonas spoke clearly and quietly back over his shoulder, "Not the sewage. The storm drains for the courtyard. It looks like it drains straight out. It should get us into the walls. Maybe we could come out of the sea, climb the cliff a little bit, and scan for sensors. And then we go into the grate and wait for the start signal and come out behind some shed somewhere and make our move from there." Someone behind him, other than the first speaker and quiet sergeants, punched his boot. "Well, how in the hell will we swim all that way past their sensors, genius?" Jonas was getting frustrated and snapped, "I don't know. This is a resort town. Maybe they have swimming gear at some store down there, and we'll get you a bikini." Still irritated, he almost added something about where the speaker could stick his head and fart. Instead, he was cut off by his squad leader. "Fine, it's the best idea we've had and gets us in without the 9 of us shooting it out with the 400 guys they got hidden in them walls. Private, you play pack mule for your corporal. Go down to the beach and steal some fins and scuba equipment from one of them vacation tourist shops. The rest of us finish here. We'll prep gear and ammo for the infiltration." They actually let him sleep after his turn on the spotting scope. When he woke up to a kick in his leg, it was dark, and his team's corporal was waving at him to follow out of the hole. Jonas followed at a trot down the hillside and into a lazy stroll to not draw attention through the back alleys of the town, with only his silenced personal weapon and a few magazines of ammunition as protection. The only additional piece of equipment his corporal brought was an arc welder with an independent power cell. Once at the back door of the closed dive shop, he made quick work of cutting open the lock's workings and then cannibalizing the device and using its power to feedback and short out the electromagnetic lock before pulling the door open. The corporal shook his hand, cooling off the electrical burn in the misty rain, while stowing his gear. Jonas felt sort of bad about tracking mud all over the clean floor. But once Jonas stole a set of dive bags and started following the corporal who was pulling fins, goggles, and breathers off the rack, he realized that fretting about the dirty floor was sort of silly. When the bag was full, Jonas started to sling the bag. The stronger corporal's neck tied him with a fist on his front collar, yanking his head down, causing him to drop the bag. "Fuck you, Private. I'm taking this. Drag you's happy ass over there and load up 9 tanks for us. And make sure they gots air and or we'll be sucking water." Jonas surrendered the lighter bag to his corporal, who stood watch on the back door with his own silenced chemical assault rifle. Jonas checked and rechecked all 9 tanks for air. He loaded a 10th tank just to be sure and balanced the load with 5 tanks per bag. While he was behind the counter closing the first of the heavy dive bags, he saw and packed a box of large trash bags. He slung the obscenely heavy dive bags over his shoulders and told his corporal he was ready. They snuck back uneventfully through the sleepy and empty resort town. It must have been too dark, cold, and crappy in the rain for anyone to spend any time outside or looking out their windows, even though it was only 2100 local time. They were probably not asleep yet. They were probably all just inside, warm and dry, and not under 2 bags of recreational diving tanks threatening to pull their shoulders off as they trotted up the entirely too steep and slippery hill to their hide position on a hostile plant at the bottom of a muddy hole. By the time he skidded into the position, his team corporal was already handing out the diving gear he had hauled up the hill. While prepping their gear, the Bravo team corporal cursed, "Shit, our weapons is gonna be fucking soaked wit dirty nasty drain water, and covered wit runoff oils and shit." Remembering the trash bags that he picked up, Jonas pulled out the box of trash bags and offered them. Instead of thanks, the corporal cuffed the back of his head. "Why da fuck didn't you say nodding before?" Jonas was ready to punch the jerk corporal in the middle of his face. His squad leader dragged the corporal back and tossed him aside in their hide position. He moved between the two and claimed his share of the garbage bags, ripping long runs of bags out of the box. He whispered harshly, "Keep your bloody noise down, Moran. He brought the stuff and gave it when you whine like the little bitch you are. Now shut the hell up and get back ta work prepping your gear. If I hear another peep outa you, corporal, I'm gonna tape your damn noise hole shut." The Bravo corporal kicked Jonas' boot vengefully, but inched off to the fighting position's side so he could prep his gear in the mud. Their squad leader spoke, vindicating Jonas. "Good thinkin' wit da bags, Private." Chapter 109. When they were getting ready to jump into the system, Samson felt that little helpless jitter. He would be little more than a hapless spectator in this battle, and could not affect his own destiny with his personal competence, with sword or handheld firepower. Captain Brockish took the opportunity to ruthlessly tease Samson about dying so fast they would not know what hit them. Samson simply complained, "That's no way for warriors to die." Captain Brockish pontificated oddly, "Don't worry, High Commander. You can't die out here." Curious at the sudden change from the teasing, Samson asked, "Why not?" Seemingly bored, the captain replied, "Orders." Samson asked, "How so?" He replied matter-of-factly, "I have orders to bring you back alive and in one piece, or I'll never exist." The oddity of the overly protective statement led to only one person in Samson's mind. "Let me guess, Persephone." Agreeing, the captain chimed, "Yup. She said since she can't hurt a child, she'd never do that to me." but she was painfully clear that if I failed to bring you back alive and in one piece, she would devote her life to inventing time travel so she could go back in time. Once there, she would seduce my grandfather just long enough so he missed his first date with my grandmother. Once done, Lady Persephone said she'd make my grandma so jealous and disgusted that she'd never want to see him again, and therefore I'd never even exist. Samson mumbled, "That sounds like her. I find it interesting you decided to wait this long before telling me. Did she say anything else?" Captain Brockish shrugged and shared. "She told me not to tell you. I had special instructions, but I figure at this point, what the hell. The only thing else she said was that we're supposed to kick their asses." Samson called his bluff. "She didn't say that to you." Shrugging again, the captain agreed. "I suppose not. She said we were supposed to kick their butts." Samson offered, "I can believe that. She just tries to watch her language in public." The captain teased, "Not ladylike?" Samson shrugged and told the ship's captain, "No, something about her mother boxing her ears." That brought a smile, and the captain made the age-old noncommittal sound, hum. Suspicious, Samson demanded, "Hum what, Captain?" The older subordinate officer speculated, "So, it's true what I've heard and seen on those vids of yours." Samson prompted, "What's that?" Shrugging, the captain told him that you really aren't scared of anything but displeasing or failing her. Samson wondered, "What do I have to be scared of?" Captain Brockish asked rhetorically, "You mean other than being blasted to atoms in a glorious head-to-head closure space fight against overwhelming odds, in a battle so fast that it is all driven by computers and over before our brains can register that we're dead?" Samson replied simply, "Well, yeah, other than that. But I'm not sure that I said I was scared of it. If I did, I misspoke. I'm more unhappy with the concept of never facing my opponent. Slashing someone with fire and steel over tens of thousands of kilometers just seems a little anticlimactic." Captain Brockish shook his head with a sigh. "Birds, sir." Samson asked, "How so?" The captain paused, considered, and began slowly, "Well, and please don't take this the wrong way since I'm about to commit a social faux pas by discussing religion and politics before and during a party and all, you and your whole. Family, I guess, is the best word. You all have these flashy minority religious beliefs. You're personally hardcore Bushido and Norse. Her family kneels to the Greek pantheon claiming that name and heritage. There are all the middle humanity religions you could have all picked predating any of the modern stellar cosmos beliefs." Samson interrupts, "The middle humanity religions? What do you mean by that?" The ship's captain shared, "Well, the whole anthropology thing, pre-industrialization, pre-interstellar flight, and modern times. You all picked pre-industrialization belief systems. It's just sort of odd to see people reaching back that far." Samson shrugged. "Whatever fits that person and works for them. Who am I to tell someone else how to shape their morality? As long as they don't piss on my shoes, I have no issue with them doing whatever suits their fancy. As far as dying, as guardsmen we're all made for it. Since we were all 5 and enrolled in the academy, our lives were forfeit to protect the citizens of the hegemony." Captain Brockish nodded sagely. "I heard that about you too." Samson asked, wondering where this game was going, "What's that?" The captain stated the obvious, that you're a zealot like the rest of us, but you even more so because you have something to lose in the process. Samson could only agree, "I suppose you're right. I do have something to lose, and to fight harder for. Don't tell me you're scared of dying now." Captain Brockish actually chuckled. I'm not. I fear something far worse and much more insidiously painful than going poof in space. Puzzled, Samson asked, "What's that?" The captain favored his control station with a roguish grin while checking telemetry and quipped, "Promotion, and losing my ship, and being stuck behind a desk to rot and grow old." Samson chuckled. "Hate to break it to you, Captain, but you're going to grow old one way or another." The captain admitted, "True, unless I die, I suppose. But I can either do it in style with a warship wrapped around me, or I can do it tortured to death under paperwork for the rest of my life." Samson was getting grumpy because he realized his desk was the only one the captain could be promoted into. He grumbled back, "There's plenty of paperwork on this ship. Besides, I will need a new commandant of the academy soon. That way I won't even have to promote you. I can just clamp you in leg irons, drag you kicking and screaming from the bridge of this ship, and peg you to an eye hook drilled into the middle of the office floor, and then I could keep an eye on you." Feigning hurt at the sadistic nature of the promise, Captain Brockish snapped, "You wouldn't." Samson snapped right back, "Try me." Captain Brockish cried, "You are a sadistic bastard, sir. I take back everything nice I've ever said about you. I might even risk Persephone's time travel threat and get us killed to avoid a desk with no war song built around it." Samson signed, smiled, and responded, "Captain, we need to have a quiet chat and re-examine your priorities someday soon." The captain tried to weasel his way back into good graces and asked, "Can we do it over a bottle of scotch?" Samson snapped, for no better reason than to be disagreeable, "No, professional counseling isn't done over bottles of scotch. If you bring a bottle of earth scotch out at our counseling session, I'll have to consider it a bribe and keep it all to myself." Captain Brockish shook his head and sighed theatrically as he responded, "Sir, that's just not nice."
Thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate your listening. When you get a chance, please come and hit the like, subscribe, leave a comment, and check out the book for real down in the description.